the question is really, what value does the government add if they are in the mix? And I think it's a negative value in many cases, because you're electing people that are not necessarily experts at what they're supposed to be managing. There'll be a day when the merchant just doesn't want it anymore because it's worthless. If you look at history, there's many examples in history of money just being worthless in a period of weeks and months. Fiat is an abomination. It should not exist. If you go to the origin of money, it's peer-to-peer. It is just people doing things and trading with one another. Money is a layer for trade. So if I specialize in making hats and you specialize in, I don't know, growing apples, we can trade one hat for, I don't know, 3 apples or something like that.
Yeah.
But if I don't need an apple or you don't want a hat, then I can owe you and I can still take the apple from you.
Right.
So money is really a layer for us to trade. And then when you network that over the planet with all humanity, you kind of have this invisible layer of money. And that's anchored to the physical realm historically through things like seashells, salt, gold, and paper. And now digitized paper, but controlled by centralized parties. But the origin of money is, it's just a invisible ledger. And when you try to bring it down to the real world and give it a physical property or physical attribute, that's an attack vector. It's a weak point because someone can now control the ledger.
Right.
So if you have gold as your money, wherever you put your gold, that's a attack vector. They can switch it out, lend it, and just fill the vault with lead painted gold.
Yeah.
If it's paper money, well, actually paper money is kind of okay if you recognize it, but you have counterfeiting. But digital paper money, or fiat as we know it today, is a big problem because they can just print it easily. And there is no way to audit the supply or control it. So that is how money gets corrupted. What Bitcoin does is it brings it back to the origin of money, which is there is no physical form to Bitcoin. If you know 12 words, you have your money. So I think this is a restoration of money back to what it must be, which is dematerialized and singular in purpose, which is tracking value transfer.
I read this article that MIT's listed down like 10 top tech of 2024, and one of them is quantum computing. And apparently, quantum computing would be able to break the encryption system in years.
It is theoretically possible,
Right.
but we're nowhere near that happening. Quantum computing could potentially attack Bitcoin, right? One is public-private key generation, guessing your private key. The other would be mining, surpassing the Bitcoin mining network now and getting the nonce and getting the blocks. So let's break those two things apart. So the first one is the breaking of basic public-private key encryption. When that happens, I think there are bigger problems because that will stop general e-commerce around the world and even more dangerous things like nuclear launch codes and the like. So I think there are more problems to be solved as a whole from humanity than let's just worry about quantum computing killing Bitcoin. The other part is the mining. If quantum computing does become a real thing, it's not there yet. I still am not sure it would be able to compete with mining as we have it today with ASICs, because you'll have one quantum computer when it emerges. It'll be very expensive and very difficult to maintain. And you'll have competition with millions and millions of ASICs that are all working in parallel. One quantum computer is not likely able to compete with all of the Bitcoin hashing power.
Do you see the world in Bitcoin standard?
The world is running on a dollar standard right now, right? But what we're going to is a Bitcoin standardized world. But there's probably 5 to 10 years before we hit that point. So our slogan is we are accelerating Hyperbitcoinization at Gen 3. So that's the point at which you no longer convert Bitcoin to fiat money. And people don't want fiat money at that point. They only want Bitcoin. So they won't even accept dollars. The point of hyperbitcoinization and hyperinflation are sort of one and the same. It just becomes a transition to Bitcoin and you don't want the dollars anymore. The entire fiat system is on its last legs. these are the death throes of the fiat system. It's almost over. And I believe these things are more sudden than gradual. I believe it's much sooner than that, simply because these transitions are very fast and very violent.
Very violent. Help me visualize. Like 5 years.
It's because the world is largely asleep.
Right.
Like the amount of people that understand Bitcoin and can talk intelligently about Bitcoin is probably less than, I don't know, 1% of the population. Then you have more percentages that kind of have it, are exposed to it. But by and large, most people don't really understand. And they don't even understand the legacy monetary system. So you have a huge gap in understanding there. But reality kind of destroys that. So when nobody wants fiat money, then nobody will want fiat money. It'll be a very sharp drop-off. And they may not understand why, but they will experience it firsthand when you can't buy gas or raw materials like resources, petroleum, liquefied natural gas, all these things. The seller will just want Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So that will just happen very quickly and it'll just change. There'll be a day when the merchant just doesn't want it anymore because it's worthless. If you look at history, there's many examples in history of money just being worthless in a period of weeks and months.
It's so hard to imagine. Currency is a way for a government to actually have control over its people, right?
But it's not supposed to. There is no reason for governments to have control over the money supply. It was just kind of slipped in.
Right.
And the concept of central banking is actually a communist tenet. It's a core part of communism to centralize the banking and have a central bank. So you have to ask yourself, why do we have central banks today when we're against communism and against collectivism? There's something wrong with the whole world. I think there was a talk from Snowden. I forgot which event, but he was asking the audience, do you feel the state of the world is normal right now, where you're electing a president that's kind of the best of the worst? You're not electing someone you're proud of that represents the best ideals of humanity, but you're just kind of hoping to get someone that's not so bad.
Right.
But it's the whole state of the world. Everything is kind of wrong. And I see Bitcoin is a driving force to right those wrongs in the world by fixing the money supply. So if you go back to the original point I was making about the origin of money, that money is not a material thing, and it should not be, that is fixing a key part of civilization, because trade and the ability for us to interact with one another through trade is the basis of civilization. Therefore, money is the basis of human civilization. Otherwise, we could not do things like specialize in different things, like, you know, YouTuber, podcaster, or farmer, or doctor, or engineer. So all the things that we have today are because we can specialize, and we can specialize because we can trade and use money to trade.
Help me imagine what the world would be like without different currencies.
You'll still have currency. It'll be Bitcoin. You have to have some layer for settlement of trade. The question is, what is that layer? Is it paper or a ledger at the Federal Reserve, or is it Bitcoin? But there is always something to do that. Otherwise, you go back to a barter economy, and then you can't really specialize again. You might as well make your own hat at that point,
right?
Than to find someone that will trade with you at that given point. So money has to exist, and uncorruptible money is the key to the future. And we were doing okay when we had gold, but gold is easily corruptible because it's hard to move.
Right.
But if money is information and Bitcoin is simply information, and we embrace Bitcoin to be money, then we can fix that problem, because now it is easy to move and easy to store.
How do you convince the governments to adopt Bitcoin? Because the idea of decentralization is against their interest.
If you look at government interventions, they usually don't work very well. If the government backs away, is smaller, less impactful, is a far better thing. So if you look at Argentina as a case study, there's a famous video that went viral of Milei ripping things off the board, all the government agencies. And now you can see that they have a surplus. Inflation is declining. And then he stopped regulation of the rental market, the housing market. And now there is an abundance of supply. So all they had to do is get out of the way, and the market will solve a lot of these problems. So the question is really, what value does the government add if they are in the mix? And I think it's a negative value in many cases, because you're electing people that are not necessarily experts at what they're supposed to be managing. So I think having the government removed from many things, especially money supply, money management, is a big benefit, because it corrupts the whole system in the end. Like in Canada, the Central Bank of Canada, Bank of Canada, is effectively an ATM for the government. There is no clear separation, and there is no clear governance. It's just they need money, we print money.
Yeah. But they can argue, oh, I use this money for healthcare or other things.
Ask someone in Canada, how is healthcare in Canada? How is it declined over the last 10 plus years? It's basically, it doesn't work anymore, because they also have limits on how much doctors can get paid. So there is a shortage of doctors now.
Speaking of the prime minister or vice prime minister. Yeah. That there was a clip of her trying to freeze someone's bank account.
Oh yeah, they do that too.
Yeah. And I was like, oh wow, that's government having too much power. And when you say Bitcoin can fix all that, is this what you mean, what you just said?
Well, yes. If we have a separation of money and state, which is not that the state doesn't have money, it's that they can't control the money supply, then they can't freeze your bank account. And I think that is a key part of democracy. The other end of it is pushing out a CBDC.
Right.
And that is far worse. So at least right now, the government is a little bit removed. So if we go back to Canada as an example with the Freedom Convoy and the truckers protesting, the government wanted to freeze accounts, but they can't freeze it directly. They still need to go and ask the banks to freeze it. But with a CBDC, they don't need to ask anybody.
It's insane.
And then you implement social credit.
Yeah.
And then it's just an automated system at that point.
It seems like the world is going that way.
Well, the world wants to go that way.
Yeah.
But Bitcoin is counteracting that. So Bitcoin is a force for freedom, whereas the current system as it stands is tending towards control.